Hey everybody, welcome to Ongaku Concept, and this month on our Patreon requested analysis, we're looking at a song called Zeta from the Dance Dance Revolution series. Now, this track is quite harmonically complex, and it may not look that way right now, but it'll get that way, trust me. And basically, as you can see, there's no notation whatsoever on this score. It's just the bars and just the chord names. We're looking at the harmonies in particular, and we're going to be going over some of the functions. All right, so let's get into that. So it's in the key of G sharp minor. I'll show you the intro here. So it's just going back and forth between E major 7 and F sharp, and the F sharp is just there to provide a little bit of extra motion. So in essence, it's really just hanging out on E major 7 as much as possible for the majority of this section. E major 7 is a predominant. It's the 6th chord in the key, and predominance being sort of a happy medium between the restfulness of tonic chords and the tension of dominant chords. They provide a lot of motion without the necessity of wanting to resolve immediately. So they provide a lot of motion. It gives it that sort of dreamlike quality, in my opinion. Let's move on. All right, so the vocals have come in here, and I'm not going to talk too much about the arrangement, but I do want to point out that the vocals are being harmonized with closed voicings, meaning that the way the notes and the chord are being spread out, they are placed as closely together as possible. That's the difference between a closed voicing and an open voicing. A closed voicing is where you take the notes in the chord and place them as closely together as possible, and that puts all those little dissonances right up next to each other, and it makes a sound that's really pleasing to my ear, and I think it fits the tone of the song really nicely. So we finally get a resolution on G sharp minor 9, but for the most part, it's really hanging out on E major 7 and occasionally climbing up, as we can see. And really, that's essentially what's going on throughout the rest of it. As you can see, the harmonic rhythm changes a little bit. So instead of holding out the chords for 2 bars, it's now doing one every bar. But aside from that, I mean, for the most part, it's all pretty much the same. And I don't think it's necessary for me to go over that. All right, so now that we've gotten through this section, this is where the fun begins. And this is, it looks very complex right now, but trust me, it's not that bad. Let's take a listen to this, starting with this A major 7, sharp 11. I should note that the tempo has kind of been cut in half at this point. All right, so just looking at those 4 bars, we started on A major 7, sharp 11. This is our first out of key chord, so I think it really strikes the ear. This is a flat 2 in the key, and you can consider it to be from Phrygian if you want to think about it that way. I see it as a secondary subdominant. Basically, I see it as the 4 of E. So E is our 6. This is the 4 of 6. I see it as a secondary subdominant of sorts. It's a plagal cadence from A to E. Then from E we get our 5 chord, D sharp over F double sharp, yay for grammar, and we just go straight over to G sharp minor. So that's really not very complicated. Like, yes, nobody likes double sharps, and this is a big chord, but really all it is 4 of 6, 6, 5, 1. That's it. Now, let's move on to this little bit. Let me play it back. So that second chord after the G sharp minor 9 sounds really fascinating. Ordinarily, we'd have an A sharp diminished chord there. We have an A sharp minor 9, meaning the 5th has been raised, so it's natural instead of flattened, and we also have a 9th added. So the 5th would be E sharp. That's the raised 6th in the key. You can consider that to be from Dorian if you like. I'm going to refer to that multiple times throughout this. There are some really fascinating ways that the Dorian mode is, or at least the raised 6, is used throughout this piece to alter chords. The 9th is also really interesting because it's B sharp, which would be the major third of the of this scale, and of the G sharp minor scale. It'd be a raised third, and so that's really like that's out there, isn't it? But functionally, it's just the 2 chord. So we have just 1, 2, 5. You know, that's standard stuff. It's just that the chord has been altered. So it does sound pretty far out because there's some pretty, I don't know what term I'm looking for, not essential tones, but it's altered in a way that you notice it, that's for sure. But it still serves the same function. So moving on. I'm going to stop it there. So E major 7, F sharp major 7. Now ordinarily we'd have an F sharp 7 in this key. The major 7 is E sharp. Again, that's the raised 6, that's from Dorian. We have another A sharp minor 9. Then we get G sharp major 7. So if you like, you can call that a Picardy third. If you don't like calling Picardy thirds at places where it's not the end of a song, then call it something else, whatever. The way I see this, and maybe this wasn't intentional, the way I see it is as a sort of progression where he's kind of slowly leading the listener outside of the key. F sharp major 7 introduces the raised 6th, as I mentioned. A sharp minor 9 keeps that raised 6th, and introduces the major third, and then from there, it's very easy to go right down to G sharp major 7. Our third has already been raised, so it's not hard to make that adjustment. I think it's a really nice way of using altered chords to make other chords less jarring. Maybe jarring is not the right term for it. Whatever. Let's continue. Now this is where things get really hazy to me. I think hazy is probably the best word to describe it. We have an F sharp 6/9. That's it's just a fancy F sharp chord. Then we have a G minor 7. Now this, I see this as just a passing chord to G sharp minor 9. But this chord here, really you can think of this all with voice leading. Whenever you find really strange chords that make little sense theoretically, voice leading is usually the culprit. What I mean by that is that the voices in the individual notes that are leading, you know, from chord to chord, have been arranged in such a way that you progress very smoothly from one to the next. And generally, when you have situations like that, it's a result of voice leading. So, something that I find is useful in my own writing and in analyzing tracks like this is to remember things that a minor chord can. What's the word I'm looking for? I am at a loss for words today. A minor chord can move to a major chord, a semitone below it, very, very easily, because there's not a lot that you have to move, especially if you're working with sevenths. If we had an F sharp major 7 here, F sharp major 7 to G minor 7, the only thing we would have to do is move the root and fifth up a semitone. We can leave the third and seventh there, and they become the new seventh and third, respectively, of the new chord. There's very little you have to do to make that adjustment. So, a major chord moves very well to a minor chord, a semitone above it, and vice versa. Anyway, we have another G sharp minor 9, A sharp minor 9. And we move on to this next little bit over here. So this is really cool. We have an E major 7, B major 7 over F sharp. Really, that's just 4 to 1. And then that whole idea is brought up a semitone, F major 7, C major 7. You can consider this a modulation to C or to A minor or whatever. I don't think it's worth changing the key signature, though. It's just temporary. It just goes straight back to G sharp minor in just a moment. As for why the chords are in second inversion, B major 7 over F sharp, C major 7 over G, I think that it's just interesting with the bass, you know, because the bass is just going E, F sharp, F, G. It's just playing around with a lot of chromatic neighboring tones like that. And I don't know. I think it's really interesting to highlight the eccentricities that arise when working with chord movements like this, and I think that was the idea going on with the bass movement. But that's just my own little theory. Moving on to the next section, it looks very similar to the previous one, but there are a few differences. Namely, the arrangement's going to get much more complex. But I'll explain a little bit what I think is the reason for some of these changes. Let's just go through it a little bit. Okay. It's very similar to the previous section. As you can see, a lot of the extensions, the weird extensions we were facing before, have been changed or edited out. Instead of a D sharp chord here, we just have an F sharp. We do still have our A sharp minor 9. Over here, though, instead of an F sharp major 7, we have an F sharp add 4. The ninth is taken out of this chord. This one actually, this is the only chord to get more complex. Instead of a G sharp major 7, if you just stick F on the bass, it becomes F minor 9. Yeah. So I think some of the Dorian-ness, some of the raised sixths have been removed from some of these chords. I think in an attempt to make the harmonies a little bit simpler, a little bit easier to follow, to compensate for the arrangement getting more complex. Because, again, this is just my idea of what was going through the composer's mind while he was writing this, or I guess the arrangers. It was arranged by somebody other than the composer. I forget the name. As the arrangement got more complex, dialing back on some of the harmonic complexity kind of makes room for that. That's how I see it. Over here, we have a very similar progression to the one up here. E major 7 has been replaced by A major 7 sharp 11. It functions roughly the same way. And then we have a B add 9 over D sharp instead of B major 7 over F sharp. Same sort of function. Just the bass notes are different, making things a little bit more interesting. They're kind of jumping around a bit. As you can see, this C major 7 is no longer in second inversion. So, moving on, we get our first key change. And this is really cool. I really like the voicings on this. So we changed keys to B flat, and we have something called chord planing, where the idea is that you take a single chord and you just move it around. In this case, he's using the exact same voicing for all of these. It's just B major 7, A flat major 7, G flat major 7, and so on and so forth. The way I hear this, personally, you can view this as being non-functional, but the way I hear it is kind of each chord is sort of a really fancy, glorified scale degree. So I hear, especially because they're all the same voicings, I hear this as the 1, this is the flat 7, this is the flat 6, 1, flat 7, 2, 1. That's how I hear it. And maybe this comes from being a guitarist, because guitarists often treat power chords, which is a chord with just the root, and it is just a perfect fifth. They treat those kind of like bigger bass notes. So sometimes you'll see a guitarist play a power chord, a perfect fifth, on the 7th degree of a major scale. Ordinarily, we'd have a diminished fifth there, but guitarists often ignore that, partially out of ignorance. And just play a fifth there, because they're not really thinking of it as a chord. They're just thinking bigger bass notes in a way. And so that's how I approach this. And maybe that's just my guitarist mindset. I don't know. So moving on, it changes back to the key of G sharp minor, and we get a time change to 6/4. I'll let you hear this for a moment before I comment on it. Okay, so as you can see, we just have a long string where it's just E major 7, and that's it. The arrangement, as you know, it was. Let me move this microphone up. All right. So the arrangement, as we saw, was getting more and more complex as we went along. And here, this is a nice place to give the listener a bit of a break, both from the harmonic complexity as well as the complexity of the arrangement. And we just have this long string where it's just one chord. And the arrangement, it's very dense of a sound at this point, but there's not a lot going on in terms of varying textures or varying rhythms like there was before. So I think it's a nice place to give the listener a bit of a break from that. And there's a few random bars with strange times, just to offset things. I'm not sure why, but this part's really interesting. A couple bars of 10/4. That's how I decided to. Originally I wrote this the way it was subdivided, and you didn't want to see that. So let me play back this section for you. So this starts to get a little crazy. You know, it was, honestly, I think this is probably the last vestige of order in this track for quite a while. And this part, it sort of erodes into chaos. And I think that's partially reflected in the rhythms as the subdivisions start getting pretty random to my ears, and the harmonies as well. I've written the chords here as they show up, just so you can see what's going on: A, B, E flat, and then B flat minor 7. But that's I don't think there's any purpose to those chords functionally in any way. I think it's just descending into madness. And these chords are just a consequence of the voice leading. So now we get this really interesting section in 17/8, where we change keys once again to B flat, and we see the return of major 7th chord planing. So that's really interesting. Not only does it tie it back to the previous section up here, but again we have major 7th chord planing, and it's very chaotic, both in terms of the harmonies and as well as the rhythm. And so I really like the idea of this stability becoming eroded and just descending into this chaotic mess. I think that's really fascinating. And the progression's a little bit different than what we had before. A flat, B flat, D, E. So flat 7, 1, 3, raised 4. We got but at least before we were working with pretty normal degrees. The raised 4 is pretty rare. The way I see this, possibly the composer thought, A flat, B flat, okay, it's a major second. Let's jump that up a bit and then do the same thing. So D and E, that's another major second. But I think the use of the raised 4 gives it a really interesting sound. Again, I just hear these all as glorified scale degrees more than anything. The melody at this point, if you can call it a melody, I honestly hear it more as just as an embellishment of these chords, is following the chord tones as much as it can, and really I think that's almost necessary when you're working with a progression of this sort. So, the next bits. Beginning to return to some sense of stability. Let me start that a little bit before so you get some context. We have this string of minor chords, C sharp minor, D sharp minor, G minor, D minor, F minor, C minor, in common time. And I think this is kind of his way of breaking out of this whole chord planing situation and going to something more stable. So C sharp minor, that's not very far. The previous chord was E major 7. C sharp minor shares a couple notes with that, so it's not too far of a movement. So he takes that, moves that up a whole tone, and then we get this G minor, D minor, F minor, C minor pattern, this descending sort of idea. Now, I wonder if the composer of this is familiar with much rock music, because this pattern, in terms of like the bass notes themselves, is something that you actually see quite a bit in rock. Almost never with minor chords, usually with major chords. So you have G major, D major, F major, C major, usually in the key of G. You'll hear stuff like that all the time. Duran Duran's Rio is the first example that comes to mind. I think the chorus uses that. And so perhaps this composer was doing something like that, and he was thinking, okay, let me just use minor chords here and take this sort of pattern. I don't know, that's just an idea. But in any case, it's a return to structure of some kind, because there's an order you can get out of this, right? We have G minor that goes down a fourth to D, that jumps up a third, down a fourth. So there's some sort of structure, some sort of pattern we can gather from this. It's a little less crazy than what we had before. And then our next section, and the last section of this piece, before the outro, changes to 5/4 time, and we confirm the key as being G minor. All right, so G minor, C minor 7, D minor 9, which I'm sure stood out to you, and D add 9 over F sharp. So that's just 1, 4, 5, and then the 5 chord has been raised with the minor third has been raised up to a major third to pull more strongly back to G minor. Now this ninth here is really interesting. Ordinarily we'd have a D minor 7 in this key. The ninth is E natural, which is the raised 6th. Again, that comes from Dorian, and it's a return of the use of Dorian. Now, what I think is really cool about the use of Dorian in this song is the way it's used in chord extensions, because a lot of the time you will find when people try to apply Dorian to their harmonies, they'll use chords like the major 4, maybe a minor 2, but in this case, this song's implementation of Dorian happens most often in the extensions of the chords rather than the fundamental degrees. So here we have the ninth altered. So the core of this chord is just fine, and it works entirely within the key, but the ninth makes it stand out in a subtle kind of, maybe not subtle, but in a unique way. I'm not sure what word to use to describe it, but it really stands out to me. Earlier as well, with the F sharp major 7, the core of the chord was just fine, but the 7th was altered. And I think that's a rare or lesser often used way of implementing modes or non-diatonic harmonies, notes into your harmonies. And so I think that's really interesting. So moving forward, So the harmonic rhythm is doubled here, so we have 2 chords per bar instead of 1. G minor, C minor, D minor 9, C minor 7. This goes down to a B flat major 7, E flat major 7, D7. So that's just 3, 6, and then 5. And that's it. And that just repeats. So it closes off just with 6 bars of G minor. And really, I think the lack of velocity in the piano part really reminds me of, and the speed, of course, reminds me a lot of Toho. I'd be interested in seeing an arrangement of this with some electronic drums or something. Really turn it into a Toho kind of piece. So that's the general idea of the song. It's really not as complicated as it looks. There are certainly points where things seem pretty insane, but a lot of that can be explained away through voice leading. Again, this I count as just randomness, honestly. There's some chord planing, but for the most part, like especially up here, these progressions can be explained pretty simply. It's just that some extensions have been altered with the Dorian mode and other such things. So, and lastly, I do again want to point out the arrangement, because it started out fairly simple harmonically, fairly simple texturally as well, and it slowly grew in complexity before giving the ear this long section as a break, becoming chaotic once again, and then coming out into something more stable for the rest of the piece. So I think varying a piece like that between stable, unstable, stable, unstable, kind of like a tide, it makes for a good listening experience, in my opinion. So if you want the sheet music to this, I will be posting it for patrons at patreon.com/Ongaku Concept. If you want to suggest a song to analyze, you can check out my Patreon again at patreon.com/Ongaku Concept. I'll see you guys next time.